Good morning, Reptilians. Welcome back to my channel. So I recently went to Repticon in Memphis, which I've mentioned a million times by now, but going to that Repticon and my need to scroll through animal ads on Craigslist all the time has got me thinking about how to go about picking healthy animals when you're going to get a new animal. So this is obviously more geared toward those beginners who are getting their very first reptiles, and I always suggest going to reptile shows so that you're buying directly from breeders or going to Facebook groups and buying from breeders there. But this is more geared towards the beginners because if you have a lot of reptiles already, then you obviously probably know all this stuff already. Just a quick disclaimer, I do want to say that there are so many good breeders at these reptile shows, but I just wanted to make this video for people that are getting their first animal or are going to their first reptile show and they have no idea what to expect. Cheaper doesn't always equal better. So I just wanted to make this video to kind of help you and guide you through your reptile show or Craigslist experience. Just making sure that you know, I'm not saying that there's a whole bunch of bad breeders at these shows. There are so many good breeders. You just should watch out for some of them and make sure that you know what you're looking for. So we're mostly going to be focusing on those beginner animals like leopard geckos, bearded dragons, those sorts of things, because again, these are geared towards those beginner types of situations. This is also assuming that you have already done a whole bunch of research and you are ready to go and get that animal. So first off, let's talk a little bit about the things that you physically see when you are approaching these animals. First, let's look at weight. So this is obviously going to vary between animal and animal, and what we're looking for here is just an animal that looks healthy. So if you're looking at an adult African fat tail or an adult leopard gecko and they have a tiny skinny little tail, that's probably not the best animal to pick. A lot of time, weight is a precursor for parasites. We want to make sure to the best of our ability that these animals are healthy animals. So if you're looking at a fat tail gecko and its tail is tiny, stick skinny, then you should probably look elsewhere. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about shed. So this is another one that is very subjective because not all reptiles shed the same. So what we're looking for here is stuck shed or layers of stuck shed, especially on things like leopard geckos or monitors or anything like that. We don't want a bunch of stuck shed all over the animal just because, again, that could be a indicator of parasites, or it could just be because the animal was being kept poorly and it could just indicate bad husbandry, resulting in an unhealthy animal. So if you're looking at a ball python table and over you're seeing ball pythons that have just pieces of shed stuck to their body, or you're looking at any kind of table and they just have that common denominator across the table, then most likely that animal isn't being kept in the best conditions and you probably want to steer clear of that as well. Both weight and shed are two things that I see so much on Craigslist or rehoming animals on Facebook and things like that. Over and over again, you'll see very low weight leopard geckos or bearded dragons with stuck sheds all around their faces and on their tails. And in those situations, a lot of times it's just the people that have been caring for them not having the proper knowledge to take care of these animals, and then they have these sorts of problems. Literally today I was on Craigslist and someone was rehoming a leopard gecko that they said was a year old, and its tail was so skinny and it's insane. They obviously got it from PetSmart because they called it a fancy leopard gecko, but they were rehoming this guy and his tank was bare and it just wasn't the best situation. I 100% wanted to go and get this poor little leopard gecko, but it is very far from my house and unfortunately I can't drive that far. But unless you are prepared to rehabilitate an animal that could possibly have parasites or that it's underweight or anything like that, these are things that you just want to steer clear of. Next up, pay attention to how the animal is acting. Again, in terms of crested geckos, leopard geckos, these sort of things, these are animals that should be alert and paying attention to what is going on. I mean, obviously if the animal's sleeping, it's not going to be alert. But if you notice a trend of animals at a table all looking lethargic and sick or anything like that, then obviously you should steer clear of that. Again, this isn't going to go as much for crocodile skinks that play dead as an instinct, but check their eyes and things like that. Make sure that they have bright, awake, alert eyes. Make sure their eyes aren't sunken in or anything like that, because that can be a sign of dehydration. Just make sure that the animal seems to be acting okay. And you're also going to check for any signs of metabolic bone disease. I haven't seen this so much in Repticons or reptile shows, anything like that, but I see this all the time on rehoming sites like Craigslist, where basically these animals have been denied the proper lighting, the proper diet, the proper calcium, vitamins, anything like that, and because of those conditions they develop metabolic bone disease. This is very obvious if the metabolic bone disease has gotten really severe. You'll see things like a very crooked or a bowed spine, crooked tails. With leopard geckos and bearded dragons, a lot of times their jaws, top or bottom, will protrude. With turtles and tortoises, the shell can be indented. Basically, this also comes down to if the animal doesn't look right, then it is probably very sick. I'm in no way saying that you shouldn't rescue these animals if you have the means to, but if you are not going to be able to take them to the vet, because these things do require a lot of vet care and medication and things like that, and if you don't have the means to do that, then please look out for those things. Next, we're going to talk more about the actual table that the vendor sets up. This is a really big one because this is one that I have seen often. I actually didn't see it as much at the Memphis Reptile Show, but I have seen it quite a bit, and that is when you look at the vendor's animal selection and the enclosures or the boxes or whatever they're keeping their animals in to sell them are dirty. So if you're looking at reptiles and the boxes that they're being kept on are dirty and filthy, and there's tropical animals that aren't wet or being sprayed down, and there's just like a whole bunch of issues with how these animals are being kept, even though they're being kept for a very short time, they should still be kept in good conditions. I mean, they're selling you these animals. If they're that dirty, and I have seen some that are absolutely terrible, then you can only imagine and only question what their breeding facility or what the facility that these animals are being kept in are like. Because if they're choosing to show the public these animals in disgusting conditions and they think it's okay, then it's not hard to imagine that their facility is just as bad and not worse, and they may even be following unsafe practices. If they're showing the public these animals in these really dirty enclosures, that kind of just means to them this is an everyday sight. Now, I'm not talking about if you're looking at an animal and they're in a glass tank that you can tell has been used before. Obviously, these breeders are gonna reuse certain things. I'm more talking about when you can just look at the table and it looks like nothing has been cleaned ever. So, for example, if you're looking at a table and they have multiple tubs, and every single one of them is overpacked with animals, and there's poop everywhere, and there's urine-soaked paper towels or newspapers, and there's dried fruits and vegetables and shriveled up old food and dead bugs, which, yes, I have seen these things before, then they're probably not the best person to buy from. So now that we have talked about what you should look for in how the animal looks and how the vendor's table look, let's move on to the vendors themselves. Now, this is going to be more things that you need to do on your part as the buyer in terms of questions to ask and things to listen for. First of all, and this could depend on you individually, but I always like to ask if an animal is captive bred or wild caught. Now, the entire debate of wild caught animals is a whole different thing, and that is a very controversial topic, so that one completely depends on you as the buyer. But no matter if you are okay with wild caught or not, this is still a very important question to ask, because wild caught animals most of the time will come with parasites, and a majority of the time that vendor is not going to have treated those animals for parasites, so that will be all on you to get that animal's fecal sample to the vet and identify any parasites that they may have and get them treated for those. And if you are not already aware, some animals that have been wild caught, it is not uncommon for them to actually just randomly die in captivity. So those are just things that you want to watch out for, and you want to know what you're getting yourself into. Captive bred animals in general are just going to be healthier, and a lot of times they're not going to come with those parasites as long as the breeder's husbandry was all correct and everything's good. As long as you get those animals from a reputable breeder and they're captive bred, they're just going to be healthier in the end. You're also going to want to make sure that you ask the breeder if this animal has been eating, when was the last time they ate, what they're eating. If this reptile is a snake, you want to know what kind of rats or mice they're feeding, the size, if they're live, if they're feeding on frozen thawed. All of that information is very important information, because if you, let's say, get a ball python, you bring it home and you're trying to feed it frozen thawed rats and it has never eaten one of those before, it might take some more steps to get it to that point. And if you're just offering this over and over and you have no success, that could be why. It could have been eating live rats its entire life up until this point. You also just want to make sure that that animal already is eating good before you get it, because in general, it's just a good rule that babies are eating before they are sold. You're also going to want to ask if the breeder knows about how old the animal is. Again, this is for a couple different reasons. Number one, if it's a wild-caught animal, they're not going to know how old it is. And sadly, some vendors will lie about whether an animal is captive bred or wild caught. Number two, if that animal is too young, it might not be eating like it should yet, and it honestly should be observed more before it's sold. That's why when we got our blue-tongued skink, we had to put a deposit down, and then we later picked him up, so that way they could just make sure that he was eating okay and make sure that everything was going okay with him before we actually got him. Also, I always like to ask how old animals are, because I like to put their birthdays in my phone. Maybe that's weird. I don't know. I like to celebrate animals' birthdays. Moving on. Another question that you can ask, which most of the time this isn't going to be a necessary question unless you're planning on breeding in the future. This is more for your benefit. You can ask if that animal is a male or a female. Now, some reptiles, it's going to be very hard to tell. Blue-tongued skinks are one of those where it is very, very difficult to tell if it's a male or a female. But if they can tell, or if they know, for example, leopard geckos, they are actually temperature sexed, where if the temperature is at a certain range, it's a male or a female. This is always a good question just to ask to see if they know, and that saves you time in the future from having to figure out if your animal is a male or female. And also that saves you from naming your male gargoyle gecko Goliath and then finding out that he is actually a female and it's already posted on the internet and now everyone knows. And if you are dropping a lot of money on a very specific morph that you wanted, it's perfectly okay to ask that breeder to see pictures of that reptile's parents. Because, and this is very true with like leopard geckos, who to me all look the same as babies, you want to see what it could possibly look like when it gets older. So ask to see what its parents look like. Ask to see what the other animals in that clutch look like. It's okay to ask questions. Again, I do want to reiterate, these questions should be about the animal, and you should already have done a whole bunch of research and be set up and ready to go for this animal. It's not usually advisable, especially if you don't already have animals, to just go and buy just anything that you see and not be prepared at all for it. Please prepare for whatever animal that you are getting. And as you are talking to these breeders, it's very smart to ask them questions that you already know the answer to. And what I mean by this is maybe sprinkle in a question or two that is more common knowledge, I guess you could say. Ask what that animal's humidity should be, even though you should know the answer to that question already. If they give you some crazy off the wall answer, then that's kind of a sign that you should just back off. If you're asking about a leopard gecko or a bearded dragon's humidity and they give you some crazy high number, then that's a huge red flag right there. Going back to that Craigslist ad as just another example, that person was listing that leopard gecko saying that it needed to be sprayed down every single day and that it needed to only be fed once every 3 days. That in itself is crazy, especially when you look at this leopard gecko and you see how skinny its tail is. And I don't know for sure, even though they said that this leopard gecko is an adult, But to me, this looks like a baby leopard gecko, and 100% you want to feed a baby leopard gecko so much more than once every 3 days. So anything like that, don't quiz the breeder for an unnecessary amount of time, and don't be condescending when they give you answers. Just definitely sprinkle in a couple of those questions that you already know the answer to, just to kind of make sure that what they're doing is the correct thing. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about terminology. This one is one that, again, is going to apply mostly to like Craigslist ads, Facebook ads, things like that. And that is when they refer to things as a fancy leopard gecko or a fancy ball python. Fancy isn't a morph. That is the term that big chain pet stores will use to describe anything that isn't a normal morph. So if you're looking on Craigslist and this person is saying that they have a fancy ball python and it's actually a pied or a pastel or whatever, then that right there already tells you that this animal came from a big chain pet store. And then if in that ad they're giving very poor advice on husbandry for that animal, then you kind of get a sense of this animal came from a big chain pet store and they took the advice of the big chain pet store, and you don't really know what it is that you're going to end up with. Again, if you have the means to possibly rehabilitate that animal, then 100% go for it. Just things to look out for and to help you know what you're getting into. And that is it for this week, guys. Like I said, going to that Repticon and looking on Craigslist, I just realized that I never really talk about how to actually pick these animals. I just say that Repticon is a good place to do it, and I never actually explained how to go about doing that. So I thought I would just put it in a video. Just remember that cheaper does not always equal better, and sometimes if you are getting a deal that is too good to be true, then it probably is too good to be true. And that is it. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications every time I put out a new video. Huge thank yous and shout outs to AB's Reptiles and VP Gilman 41 for following me on Instagram, going through and liking a whole bunch of my stuff. You guys are the bee's knees. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye.